Welcome to the IDP Plus Advice Show. Glad to have you here today. We're going to talk about IDP. We're going to talk about snaps and playing time. We're going to talk about alignments. We're going to talk about injuries. We're going to talk about potential waivers to pick up and players to pick up. With that, let's go ahead and get started. So I am your host, Ricky Rodrigue. You can find me at RickyRod66 on Twitter. Thrilled to be with you this evening. And what we're going to do, we're going to cover all those things I mentioned in the intro. We're going to do it division by division. So if you want to jump around on the broadcast to listen to a specific team, makes it much easier to do. We're going to start off, here we go, with the NFC North division with the Chicago Bears. Ruled out this week were both Jaquan Brisker and Kyler Gordon, so two of their secondary members. What's interesting about Jaquan Brisker, this is technically his second game missed, but because of the bye week, that's 3 weeks in a row that he's been dealing with this concussion and hasn't been active. Usually it takes a couple of weeks or so before, and then they're back up and going. So it's something to watch and be concerned on. Elijah Hicks was the person that replaced him. If Brisker's out again and you're desperate with so many of the buys coming up, Hicks could be a decent fill-in for you. There was actually a Montez Sweat sighting, folks. After I kind of gave him a little bit of grief last week, I tried to stir the pot a little bit. I guess it worked. He had 4 tackles, 3 solo, 1 sack, 3 quarterback hits. Now, the bad news on him is he had a shin injury, and he was out of the game. He was actually out of the game on that very last Hail Mary play when Jade Daniels from the great LSU had that miraculous throw to Noah Brown. But so anyway, something to watch if this injury, the shin injury, is going to keep him out. So keep an eye on things. Nobody behind him worth picking up. Tyreek Stevenson, he got credit for 1 extra play that he probably shouldn't have gotten credit for in terms of snap counts, but that's for another time. Moving on to the Lions. The Lions are hurting at defensive end, as we know. Not only Aiden Hutchinson, but several others have been out and put on IR, such as John Kaminsky. Josh Pascal, who was their, quote, leading snap person the week before and who actually had a sack the week before, had an illness on Friday and was ruled out right away on Friday on that illness, which is very strange. Usually illnesses 24 hours and they're back, but he was ruled out right away. Feels like there's more to it than that. So if you did pick up Pascal with the Hutchinson and Lions injuries and so forth, keep an eye on that to see if there's more behind the scenes. We'll be keeping an eye out for you as well. Malcolm Rodriguez, who is a platooning linebacker with the dreaded Lions platooning system at linebacker. He injured his ankle. He was out, which limited the number of people in the rotation. But still, interestingly enough, Jack Campbell played 95% of the snaps. That is the most snaps he has played by far this year. He hadn't played more than 78% of the snaps in any one game. 70% was the next highest. This week he played 95%. Now, and he was productive, 11 tackles, 6 solo. But was that just because there was such a blowout in this Tennessee game, with 52 points on the board and Anzalone playing a little bit less? So don't get too hyped by Campbell's results this past week and get too excited and throw him into the lineup too quick. Let's move over to the Green Bay Packers. Quay Walker was out once again because of a concussion. That's now 2 weeks in a row. Eric Wilson played 100% of the snaps in his place. Not quite as productive as the week before when he stepped in for Quay Walker, but he had 9 tackles, 5 solo and 1 tackle for loss. But with Walker expected to come back this coming week, this is one where Eric Wilson, you could say bye-bye to. If you got to use him for a week or two, fantastic, but don't count on him if Quay Walker is back. Edgerrin Cooper played 60% of the snaps. Isaiah McDuffie played 67%. I keep on waiting for that flip to happen. It's going to happen before the year ends, folks, where Cooper is playing in the 80-90% range. It's just not there yet. So as long as that's the case, it's hard to trust McDuffie or Cooper with snap ranges in the 60%. McDuffie still had 8 tackles, 4 solo. Cooper, though, wow, 9 tackles, 7 solo, 1 sack, 1 TFL, 1 pass defense, 1 quarterback hit. Not a partridge in a pear tree along with that, though, but very, very productive in with that limited snap. So I just think, boy, if he can get a full snap count, he would do extremely well. Devontae Wyatt returned from injury. Glad to see from that high ankle sprain. Didn't do a whole lot in the stats department, but did get a fumble recovery. He's someone I'm very high on. Usually when they come back from an ankle injury, they're not 100% that first week anyway. Don't give up on Wyatt. In the defensive secondary, starting at safety, Evan Williams left the game with a hamstring injury. 32% of the snaps is all he ended up playing. Of those 32%, he played 50% deep and 50% closer to the line. Um, that's okay, not great. We'd prefer to see much more closer to the line. So manage your expectations. 50% is not the end of the world, but it's not great either. Javon Bullard ended up playing 86% of the snaps as a result. Of those, though, of the snaps he did play, only 5% were in the slot in the box, 45% were deep. So Bullard is likely, if Evan Williams is out, to probably revert back into that safety role. And the reason I say that, too, is Keyshawn Nixon, who the past 2 weeks had moved from that slot cornerback role out to the outside, did not do that again this week. He did play some on the outside. He played about 41% out wide, but he then played 57% in the slot/box. A lot of that happening once Evan Williams left the game. So what that's telling me is they'll probably put Stokes or Valentine on the outside along with Alexander, Nixon in the slot, and then probably Bullard along with Xavier, the interception machine, McKinney as your two safeties. So that's what I expect to happen, assuming that Evan Williams is out next week. Going over to the Vikings to wrap up the central of the North Division. Excuse me. The Vikings ended up playing 72 snaps on defense against the Rams in the Thursday night game. Blake Cashman was ruled out with turf toe injury, and when that happens, Ivan Pace plays that 100% role that Cashman played. Very productive, once again on an abnormally high amount of snaps, more than the typical 65 or 66 snaps. They played 72, as I mentioned, but as typical, Pace very productive with 13 tackles, 7 solo, 1 tackle for loss, and 1 quarterback hit. And so anyway, so no other linebackers played anything of any significance. I believe Camus Grugier-Hill played a few snaps, but like 3 or 4 snaps is all it was. Very, very minimal and all. So when Cashman's back, Pace may get back to that roughly 30% range, but certainly not going to be in that 70 to 100% range, that, particularly in that 90 to 100% that we would want. So when Cashman's back, you can't necessarily count on Pace. On the safety side of things, Cam Bynum and Josh Metellus played 83% and 85% of the snaps respectively. One of the things that made them both so effective last year was both of them, along with Harrison Smith, usually played in that 3 safety alignment, and all 3 of them played almost 100% of the snaps. That is either 3 or 4 weeks in a row that Bynum has been below 90%, with this, I think, being his lowest at 83%. Metellus similarly had been in that 88, 90%, and he was down to 85. Something to watch. Now, both finished with 7 tackles, 3 of which were solo, so not horrible per se, but we'd sure like to see that 100%, close to that 100% snap count. So as you're thinking about who to start as we move forward, definitely keep that in mind when you're setting your starting lineups. Okay, now moving over to the NFC East. Let's start with the Commanders. Quan Martin had a very productive game, his most productive game of the season, in the safety spot with 11 tackles, 9 solo, 1 tackle for loss. Now, he only played 84% of the snaps. I didn't see any injury info on him. I'll be checking on it, and let's all watch the injury reports here as the week progresses to see if there was a reason why he didn't play close to the typical 100% that he usually plays. Now, when he was on the field, he only played about 66% of the snaps deep. Very, very different than what he was playing. He was playing closer to 90% deep in this Dan Quinn defense, and once again, only 66% this week. Boy, and that's obviously contributed to the stats that he had. If he continues that trend, playing closer to the box, that could be very, very good news for him from an IDP perspective. If someone gave up on him or dropped him, definitely, I'm looking to pick him up, stash him on my bench in hopes that that trend continues. Moving on from an injury perspective, Dorrance Armstrong returned from the injury that he had. So good to see him back. Played 73% of the snaps, 2 tackle, 1 solo. So not overly productive, but he was getting had, in the previous couple of games before his injury was getting some sacks. So probably not fully 100% back as he returned. So he's someone that I'm still keeping on my bench and keeping an eye on for playing. We talked previously, Jonathan Allen went on IR, and Johnny Newton, Jerzon Newton, the second round draft pick, has moved to the starting lineup in his place. Excuse me. And he had 3 tackles, 3 solo, 1 tackle for loss, 3 quarterback hits, fumble recovery, and he played 56% of the snaps. For those leagues requiring an interior defensive lineman / defensive tackle, definitely someone to pick up and bring on board. I'm excited for him. Just watching that game against the Bears, he was all over the place. He was a hustling machine. I was really worried about him because of the 2 foot surgeries he had going into the year. Seems like he's past that and someone you want to have. Daron Payne got a sack. He played 78% of the snaps. Now, what they had before Allen went on injured reserve is both he and Allen were in the low 60% snap count range. Much, much lower than last year. If Payne is going to start playing 78, 80% of the snaps like he did last year, and with the way the Commanders are playing, he looked very motivated as well. He is someone, if someone gave up on, I am absolutely grabbing and adding to my team once again if I need a defensive tackles, interior defensive lineman on my rosters and in my starting lineups. Going to the Cowboys, Eric Kendricks returned from his injury, and he played 100% of the snaps. 5 tackles, 4 solo, not exactly riveting. Got burned a lot in coverage. Great that Mike Zimmer loves him for his knowledge of his system and so forth. But the age is starting to show in Kendricks. So, boy, I'm trying to sell high on him with him being back now, folks, if you have him. DeMarion Overshown also played 100% of the snaps. Now, what's interesting is when Kendricks was out last week, Damone Clark went in and played 100% of the snaps. This week, with Kendricks back, Damone Clark played a zippo, zilch, zero, nada, pick your term, 0 snaps on defense. Maris Lufau, who had the number 3 linebacker role last week and the weeks before, continued in that number 3 linebacker role. So Clark is sort of the number 4 linebacker, but he's the number 2 Mike. So if Kendricks is out again, expect Clark to fill that middle linebacker spot. And he was very productive in the 1 week he was. So Clark could be someone to stash. Lastly, the Cowboys, as we know, 4 defensive ends on injured reserve / are out. Micah Parsons, DeMarcus Lawrence, Sam Williams, Marshawn Nealon. So the starting ends were Chauncey Golston and Carl Lawson. Carl Lawson, who several years back had 8 sacks, but has also had multiple injuries, including an Achilles tear. Not someone I want to rely on as he's approaching age 30. Golston played 85% of the snaps, finished with 5 tackles and 3 solo. And he was, I'll give him credit, he was working hard as I was watching the game against the 49ers. So, but it's hard for a defensive end at 85% of the snaps. That's really asking a lot. So, but that's where it is right now. In tackle leagues, Golston's someone to consider. If you're looking for a ton of sacks from Golston and big play scoring kind of things, not someone I'm chasing. For the Giants, I want to say you're welcome to all of you. Last week, I got on Bobby Okereke's case on this show. It's like, what the heck is going on with him? I said, put him on your bench. Don't drop him, though. I said, put him on your bench until something happens. I don't know if the light bulb went on or my speech here. Someone told him about my speech, but regardless, he had a great game against the Steelers on Monday night with 14 tackles, 7 solo, had half a sack, not to mention a forced fumble and a fumble recovery. So, all right, I'm encouraged, but one data point doesn't make a trend. Now, with all the buys coming up, maybe there's an opportunity to put him back into your lineup. But don't expect that he's going to return to Okereke from last year just based on that one game. But there's some encouraging signs, at least from last night's game. Now, the Steelers' game plan was to run the ball a heck of a lot, and they certainly did, particularly in the first half. And so that certainly helped to prop his stats. So it could be also game plan dependent. You can look at the IDP Plus if you're an IDP Plus member. Look at our tools and look at scoring against different positions, and that'll give you an idea of maybe you play Okereke or not, depending on as you look at who the Giants are playing this coming week. Azeez Ojulari, great game, 7 tackles, 3 solo, 2 sacks, 91% of the snaps. Look, Kayvon Thibodeau, someone I was down on. I do want to give a shout out to PFF because some of the alignment stats I do get from them, and also some of the pressure info I do get from them as well. But Kayvon Thibodeau, boy, for all the sacks he had last year, his pressure and win rate on rushes and all was not very good. And this year we were starting to see that as well, whereas Ojulari is doing much better. So it'll be interesting to see as time goes on when Thibodeau comes back how this plays out. But Ojulari has done better from a pass rushing perspective in terms of quote effectiveness and overall. So someone that's definitely worth picking up. From an Eagles perspective, it was a bit of a blowout game. So Nakobe Dean only played 88% of the snaps. Zach Bond played 95% of the snaps. The past couple of weeks, Dean had outproduced Bond, whereas early in the year, Bond was outproducing Dean. Things flip-flopped again. Of course, Dean played a few more snaps. Dean had 12 tackles, 8 solo. Dean had 9 tackles, 7 solo, 1 tackle for loss, and 1 quarterback hit. So there goes your NFC East. Moving on to the NFC South, the Bucks. Linebacker, let's start there with them. Servasia Dennis, it was noted earlier this week that Servasia was going to be out for the year with that shoulder injury. So he was originally put on injured reserve. There was some thought he might be back later in the year. Now he is completely out for the year. Great news for KJ Britt. Now, as the game progressed this week for the Bucks against the Falcons, Levante David left the game. He had played 87% of the snaps. I didn't see that he returned, so I believe he did not return. With that, J.J. Russell came in and played the snaps that Levante David did not play. J.J. Russell only had 1 assisted tackle. Now, granted, it's only 11% of the snaps. So keep an eye on Levante David. J.J. Russell could be someone who ends up having to play 100% of snaps if David is out and with Dennis on IR because they don't have anybody else. So like we talked about last week with Chandler Wooten, you don't necessarily have to be great to be on the field because they played Wooten almost 100% of the snaps did the Carolina Panthers, and they cut him the day after. They did re-sign him to the practice squad, but still, just to show you, could be a similar situation with J.J. Russell, but he may get some IDP stats. Someone in deeper leagues, if you got a spot on the end of your bench, go get J.J. Russell. If particularly if we're hearing word that Levante David's going to be out. Now, Christian Izien played 92% of the snaps, and he's been a little bit of a roller coaster. But let's talk about what's been going on. He played a lot of safety when Antoine Winfield was out for, I think it was 4 weeks, even though they didn't put him on injured reserve, at least 3, if not 4. And he did a great job in that Winfield role in that Bucs defense. Winfield comes back last week. Izien goes to the bench. Tyke Smith, who's been playing the slot, he was out this week. Izien goes back to the slot role, which is the role he played last week. He happened because of the Falcons' alignments, playing a lot of 11 personnel. He played 92% of the snaps in the slot, which is great. Now, if it turns out that Smith is out again, you want to look at who the Falcons are playing this coming week. Excuse me, who the Bucs are playing this coming week. Do they play a lot of 11 personnel? Will that create opportunities for Izien to be on the field if Tyke Smith is out because of that? And that'll guide you to if you should play him or not. But you can also join, here's a quick plug, our IDP Plus Start Sit show, which happens on 11 a.m. Eastern Time, 10 o'clock Central. Myself and several of my colleagues are on there, and we help you with your start sit questions, and we'll be able to answer some of your Christian Izien questions if that were the case at Tyke Smith. Okay, away from your regularly scheduled, get back to the regularly scheduled program. Let's talk about the Falcons. Troy Anderson was out yet again, even though he practiced it on a limited basis. It's expected finally that this coming week he will be back in the lineup. Now, Caden Ellis played 96% of the snaps. He was out for a couple of snaps, but was right back in. He returned from this injury. and it's expected that he will stay 100% of the snaps and he will wear the green dot. And now in the other linebacker position, one of the things we're worried about, will it be Anderson, will it be Landman? I am now even more strongly leaning towards Anderson because Nate Landman only played 75% of the snaps. J.D. Bertrand played 22% of the snaps in that second inside linebacker position next to Ellis. So it didn't appear that Landman had any injuries. He was just being rotated in and out. And so as a result, that would say that they don't have a ton of confidence in Landman. They wanted to give Bertrand a few snaps. Now, Landman did have a shoulder injury, but regardless, this is all telling me that Anderson is probably, assuming he's healthy, is going to play 100% of the snaps. Now, would it surprise me first week back, as we've seen with a few others we talked about earlier, that Anderson doesn't quite play 100% of the snaps? It wouldn't surprise me, but second week back, I certainly expect that. Okay, now let's talk about the Panthers defense here. Sticking with the NFC South. They were on the field for 73 snaps, so that's quite a bit. What happens when you have bad quarterback play? Your defense is on the field more. Bryce Young was back in quarterback. They played at more than the average normal snaps on defense, which should be good for counting stats. Nick Scott at safety. He went on IR. Surprisingly, Devontae Richardson was the person that replaced him and played 100% of the snaps. He had 11 tackles, 7 solo, 57% of the snaps were deep. Now, you'd like to see him more closer to the line, but with the weakness of the folks in front of him, it still created, even though he's back for 57% of the snaps, plenty of tackling opportunities. So there's still good opportunity for him there as long as Nick Scott is on IR. Speaking of linebackers, Josie Jewell, who's just a guy, but he can be productive when he plays and he's not injured. He is injured a lot, but he was back. And as we told you on this show, and as we expected, 100% of the snaps he played. 10 tackles, 6 solo, and a tackle for loss. Great, particularly with playing 73 snaps. Great stats, someone you can put into your lineup. I cautioned everyone about Trevin Wallace last week as well. Josie Jewell did come back. Now, he did play more snaps than I thought. I was expecting in the 60 to 70% range. He actually played 89% of the snaps. But when you play 89% of the snaps, your team plays more than an average amount of defensive snaps, and you only come out with 4 tackles and 2 solo. That's pretty darn weak, folks. So will he stay in that lineup? TBD. Will he play 89% of the snaps in the future? Not sure. But Jewell's the guy to play out of this linebacker core. Look, a couple of shout-outs. Ashawn Robinson on the interior defensive line, the veteran, 4 tackles, 4 which were solo, 2 sacks, and he plays 73% of the snaps, and he's in that 30 range. I can't remember exactly, but he's not exactly a spring chicken when it comes to pro football. For those that need interior defensive linemen, he is definitely someone to keep in mind. And it'll be interesting to see now with the Deontay Johnson trade that happened on Tuesday, him being traded to the Baltimore Ravens, the wide receiver. How many more veterans will be traded? And that includes Jadeveon Clowney, who played 89% of the snaps on the edge, which is a lot, as we talked about earlier, and had 7 tackles, 3 solo, 1 tackle for loss. Still very active, very productive. Is he auditioning to be traded to a better team? Very well could be, even though he's from the Carolina region. He might want to win instead of being close to home. On the Saints, Pete Werner returned from injury. He had 9 tackles, 7 of which were solo. He had 2 tackles for loss. He was shaken up late in the game, but he did play still 98% of the snaps. But where I want to talk about the Saints is in the secondary in particular. Last week, I was really excited because Dennis Allen had said, hey, with Paulson Adebo going on IR, Alontae Taylor would start on the outside and move into the slot when there was 11 personnel and when it called for it, which was perfect because that got Alontae Taylor to play in 100% of the snaps. Well, the good news is he played just short of 100% of the snaps. The bad news is Marshawn Lattimore, the other opposite outside corner, hurt his hamstring again. Rico Payton, his backup, hurt his back. So that meant Ugo Amadi needed to come in. Ugo Amadi is on the smaller side. So what ended up happening is Taylor ended up playing more on the outside and less in the slot, okay, as the game went on because of these injuries. He ended up playing 38% out wide, which was way more than was expected. Amadi played 19 snaps, only one out wide on the cornerback spot. The rest, 10 in the slot, 2 in the box, 6 along the D line. So in other words, Amadi moved into the Alontae Taylor role. So if Lattimore is out, if Rico Payton is out, and even if Payton's not out, they may go with Amadi. This could be a serious hit to Alontae Taylor's value, folks. Be very cautious about putting him into your cornerback required lineups this week. Be forewarned. Okay? That takes care of the NFC South. Let's move on to the Cardinals. Not a whole lot to talk about on the Cardinals, folks. Starting with on the edge, Zaven Collins played the most snaps on the edge. That was only 51%. 4 others played between 20 and 31%. Dennis Gardeck was put on injured reserve. He was the one that was playing previously, had been playing in the 40% range, although the week before he got injured, he was down to 33, then 33 the week he was injured. But it's hard to play any of these edge folks for the Cardinals. That's all you got to worry about. The other thing, I take it back. Jalen Thompson has been playing a lot of snaps in the box, a very high percentage, but it wasn't translating into tackle efficiency. This past weekend, it did translate to tackle efficiency for Jalen Thompson, but it's the first time all season. So don't get too excited about that, because he just hasn't been producing efficiently. Moving to the 49ers, Devondre Campbell, who was down to 74% of the snaps the week before, ended up playing 100% of the snaps this week. The reason why, D. Winters, who was stealing some of Campbell's snaps and had played 53, 54% of the snaps the week before, got a concussion on special teams, only played roughly 16% of the snaps. And so as a result, Campbell kept his 100% role. So lucky for Campbell from that regard. He did have 7 tackles, 6 solo. Demetrius Flanagan-Fowles didn't play any snaps on defense, according to our IDP Plus data, which, by the way, all the snap count information that I'm sharing is one of the tools in IDP Plus. As a subscriber, you can have access to those tools as well as our rankings and everything else. But back to this, remember, Dre Greenlaw will be back. When that happens, and there was in fact, let me just quickly mention on the broadcast, they mentioned in a few weeks he might be back. Still sounds a little bit early. I'm still thinking more later November that we see him back, closer to 100% playing snaps. But Campbell will go to the number 3 linebacker spot when that happens. So look to trade Campbell if you've got him. The Rams, I mentioned how many snaps the Vikings played. That meant the Rams didn't play a lot of snaps on defense. In fact, they only played 50 snaps. The Rams linebacker thing is a whole mess, folks. And so let's start off. Troy Reeder was placed on IR. I was hoping Omar Speights would move into that role, the former LSU player, the undrafted free agent who they raved about in the preseason. Didn't happen. Christian Roseboom moved into that position, played 94% of the snaps, only had 6 tackles, 2 solo. Omar Speights played 44% of the snaps. Jake Hummel played the old Roseboom role to a certain degree, but he only played 20% of the snaps and only had 1 tackle. Omar Speights had 4 tackles, 3 solo on those 44% of the snaps. When you're talking about only 50 snaps, that's not too bad. But he was only in on early downs. They did some interesting things. Michael Hoyt, the edge who used to be a defensive tackle, still primarily plays edge, but they actually put him in the box in that inside linebacker position for 7 snaps this past week. And he actually rushed at least once in watching the game that I saw out of that position, like in a blitz. Will that continue with Reeder out? It's a whole mess. You have to almost stay away from all of it, folks. Even with Roseboom playing 94% of the snaps, he's just not that good a player. On the safety side of things, Cam Curl got hurt. He did go back in the game later, but as a result, he only played 74% of the snaps. But the Vikings had, ranked near the bottom of giving up points to safeties. And that certainly was the case again this week, as both Curl and Lake had 2 tackles and 1 solo. That was it. 1 assisted tackle, 1 solo tackle for each of them. And Lake played 100% of the snaps. Lake played 64% of his snaps deep. Curl played 68% of the snaps deep. Once again, that could be because of the Vikings trying to protect against Justin Jefferson in particular. So I'm not too overly concerned with both of those folks, but stay away from that whole linebacker mess. That's all I got to tell you. Last thing on the Rams, though, Jared Verse, what a beast! Um, really outperforming what I expected, and I think he's probably getting out near the lead for Defensive Rookie of the Year. 3 tackles, 1.5 sacks, 3 quarterback hits as well. Um, in dynasty leagues, for those of you that are in dynasty leagues, I'm trying to trade for him. I might wait a week and see if this coming week he doesn't get a sack, and I would be trying to trade for him. Okay, that covers the Rams. On the Seahawks played a whopping 76 snaps on defense because their offense really struggled this past week without DK Metcalf. So it was amazing how not having Metcalf on the field and having Bobo, who runs like about a 4.8 40 on the field. So great hands, great routes, but pretty slow. So with that, the newly acquired Ernest Jones, the fourth, by the way, Ernest Jones, the fourth, just acquired him from Tennessee, who had just acquired him for the Rams. Excited to see he played 100% of the snaps, got 15 tackles, 7 solo. Inflated by the number of snaps they played, but what that says is you can play Ernest Jones with confidence going forward. He will be back to that number 1 linebacker, top 12 linebacker, assuming 12-team league kind of thing. You can expect that for Ernest Jones going forward. Feel really confident giving you that advice. Tyrell Dodson moved from the primary Mike started to the will of the 2 linebackers that McDonald likes to deploy. He had 7 tackles, 5 of which were solo, not quite as productive as he had been in the past where he was in that um, where Ernest Jones was this past week. Now, Dodson did keep the green dot, which was good, and he did play 100% of the snaps. So we're going to see, I think, that Roquan Smith, Patrick Queen thing that we saw with the Ravens last year with Mike McDonald, who's now, of course, the Seahawks head coach. So expect to continue to see that for the Seahawks, and both are playable with Jones over Dodson. Draymond Jones played 39% of the snaps before he left with an injury. Boy Mafe and Derek Hall picked up extra snaps as a result of that. Love Mafe, love Hall. Weren't that productive this past week, but 2 guys I'd love to have on my roster. Finally, as a reminder, we talked about last week how Rayshawn Jenkins had gone on IR and Kobe Bryant had an extremely productive week. At the same time, though, he played a lot of deep snaps last week. And then once again, this week, he played 79% of his snaps deep, where he was extra productive last week. He was not so this week out of that deep safety spot where he had 6 tackles, 5 solo, and then 1 pass defense. Last week, it was like 11 or 12 total tackles that he had. This is more what I expect from deep safety, someone playing like 79, 80% of the snaps deep. So if you picked him up, he's more of a safety 3, safety 4 kind of thing. So not someone to drop necessarily, but manage expectation. That first week was an outlier. Okay, with that being said, we have completed the NFC conference. We're going to move on to the AFC conference. And I'm going to take a quick breath for a second after talking for 33 minutes straight. And here we go with the AFC conference. And we're going to start off with the AFC East, and we're going to start off with the Bills. The big news, Terrell Bernard was injured and inactive. Love Terrell Bernard, the player. Don't like Terrell Bernard, the injury proneness of him. And once again, as we talked to you about last week, if Balin Spector had been dropped to pick him up, he did end up playing 100% of the snaps. Because of the way the game went and so forth, he didn't have many counting stats from an IDP perspective, did Spector. But expect better production if Bernard is out again this coming week. In fact, the Bills, to be more specific, only played 51 snaps on defense. Greg Rousseau, 3 snaps week 1, disappears for multiple weeks. 3 sacks a week ago, comes back this week with 4 tackles, 3 solo, 2 tackles for loss, 2 pass defense, 1 quarterback hit. And he did play 75% of those 51 snaps. So love where Rousseau is trending. We tried to tell you previously, trade for Rousseau. Go get him if you haven't gotten him yet, if he is available, and particularly looking at a roster of someone who might need to rebuild or something along those lines, from a dynasty perspective in particular. On the Dolphins side, for those of you with Zach Sealer, I guess you probably heard that he was out. fractured orbital bone in practice, which ruled him out. They did not put him on IR. It's not clear how many more weeks he's going to miss, but he certainly missed this past Sunday. So nobody else that I'd pick up from the Dolphins to replace him. Jevon Holland, who just came back from one injury, ended up hurting his knee. It was a hand injury, by the way. Ended up hurting his knee and left after about 26% of the snaps. It's being said that he has a chance to play this coming week. I'm not buying it, folks. Marcus May stepped in and played all the snaps in his absence, 74%, to do the math for you. He had one assisted tackle. Jordan Poyer was fairly effective with, I believe it was 8 tackles and 3 solo. It was Poyer. So he is the one in a pass defense to boot. Poyer is the one if you need a Dolphins safety. And so Poyer is someone to go ahead and pick up. At the linebacker position, David Long, who is being eased back in from that knee injury that he had, where he was splitting time with Anthony Walker, and last week was basically exactly 50-50. This week, Long played 100% of the snaps, 9 tackles, 6 solo. It was technically only 97%, but basically 100% roll. Jordan Brooks also played 100% of the snaps. So with the Dolphins, you basically have 200% linebackers as long as Long can stay healthy. Trying to say that fast 3 times, but Long has been known to be injury prone, so it puts him more in linebacker 3 range, unfortunately, as a result of that. Anthony Walker only had 1 tackle, played 0% of the snaps on defense just to close that out, and his 1 tackle was on special teams. Lastly, Chop Robinson, who I've been hard on in previous conversations. I do want to give some credit. He did move up to 50% of the snaps being played, and that's been true for basically each of the last 3 weeks, I should say. He's had 12 pressures over the last 3 weeks. It hasn't translated into sacks. Maybe when Zeeler comes back, maybe if they start blitzing Long a little bit more, Chop starts getting some sacks. Just something to keep an eye on. I'm not rushing to pick him up, but just keep an eye on things. Moving to the Jets. Boy, I tell you, this whole C.J. Mosley thing, not someone we were high on because of his age early this year, and age and injury have been an issue for him. All of a sudden, at the beginning of the Jets game, he is ruled out with a neck injury, but he hadn't played a single snap. So did something happen in practice? Did something happen in pregame? Not exactly sure. I was highly skeptical if this is another excuse just for him not playing and to play Sherwood. But on Tuesday, it was talked about that he's going for looking at his neck and vertebrae. So there is something that happened there. So what that means, fire up Jamie and Sherwood for sure, without hesitation, who had 11 tackles, 6 solo, and a tackle for loss this past week, played, I believe, all but 1 snap. Quincy Williams played 100% of the snap at the linebacker position. That has made Chaz Surratt the number 3 linebacker. He had 5 tackles, 5 solo. All 5 of those were solo with 2 tackles for loss. He only played 34% of the snaps, so he's playing that old Jeremy and Sherwood role, which can be productive on the Jets, but not something you can rely on right now. If Sherwood or Williams were to get injured, Surratt would be someone to pick up. Hassan Reddick, he decided to play. Glad that Drew Rosenhaus, his new agent, was able to work out some with the Jets to help him offset his fines and so forth if he plays well. But if he does what he did this past week, which is 0, nada, zilch, nothing. He played 39% of the snaps. Nothing, not a single stat. That's not good. Now, of course, he missed all of training camp, preseason games, a bunch of games till now. He's going to try and probably take a little bit of time to get his legs under him. On the meantime, do not put him in your lineup. Ironically, Will McDonald played 61% of the snaps. 61-39 is your 100. I didn't get a chance to double check if they were going out 1 for 1 or that just happened to work out that way. But if that's the case, and as Reddick gets his legs under him, and if he starts playing more snaps with Will McDonald not being exactly great against the run, you can see McDonald's snap count coming down, Reddick's going up. Could impact McDonald a little bit. Now, McDonald hasn't been getting a lot of his IDP points from tackles, been more from sacks, so maybe it actually keeps him fresher like last year when Bryce Huff was around, and maybe it helps with McDonald's productivity. Just be careful on both of those right now. Moving to the safeties for the Jets. Chuck Clark's on IR. Tony Adams missed with a hamstring. Ashton Davis missed with a concussion. So Jalen Mills, who played in the box a lot last week, did so again this week as well, but unfortunately not nearly as productive as he was the previous week, with only 3 tackles, none of which were solo, and 2 pass defenses. Isaiah Oliver, who replaced Tony Adams slash Ashton Davis, played 99% of the snaps, 7 tackles, 4 solo, 1 pass defense. Probably staying away from both of those guys. In general, outside of probably Quinnen Williams and Sherwood and Quincy Williams, I'm not touching any of these Jets. Right now, that just whole organization is just a cluster. And because we want to keep this PG clean, I won't add the word after cluster, but I think most of y'all know what I'm talking about. All right, let's move to the Patriots. Kyle Duggar was a Saturday downgrade and then ruled out. So Duggar did not play. Very surprising. Josh Uche was also ruled inactive, but then was traded on Monday to the Kansas City Chiefs. Makes you feel like the Chiefs and the Patriots had something going, weren't quite through with it. They didn't want to risk him to injury to mess up the trade, so Uche probably set out because of that. I think it's a great add to Kansas City, so we'll go to Chiefs tangent for a second. Michael Dana has missed so much time. The Chiefs' edge rushers have not been doing that well. Karlaftis kind of had a sack fall into his lap if you watch the game this past week. So I'll see Uche across from Karlaftis, though. I think it'll definitely help. And with Chris Jones rushing from many different spots as well, I think that it will help the overall Chiefs pass rush. Okay, back to the Patriots. Christian Ellis took over the most snaps at the linebacker position, but it was only 84% of the snaps. Now, he was extremely productive. 9 tackles, three of those being solo, a sack, a pass defense, 2 other quarterback hits. So Christian Ellis was very productive with that 84% of the snaps. Just remember, though, he's just one of those guys, like we talked about with the Trevin Wallaces of the world, as we did with the Chandler Woodens of the world. So don't get too excited by him, okay? Particularly when he's not even playing 90 to 100% of the snaps. And we know the Patriots have tended to do all this rotation stuff, and Mayo is continuing that with the cornerbacks and the linebackers and the third safeties. So, okay, just be careful about overplaying that. Jelani Tavai was down 79% of the snaps with 6 tackles, 4 which were solo. Raekwon Millen was down to a paltry 19% of the snaps, 3 tackles, 1 solo. And I think one of those was on special teams, if I remember correctly. So not feeling great about the linebacker position with the Patriots. Marte Mapu did play 100% of the snaps again this week, but very, very limited productivity. Only 39% of the snaps were deep. The rest were around the box and slot corner, but yet very, very limited production. I believe it might have been 1 tackle and 1 assisted tackle, 1 solo, 1 assisted. It was whatever it was, very, very low. So, that did not feel good. And when I was watching the game and some of the highlights from the game, he seemed like he was close to the ball, but he was never in the mix. Somebody else was making the tackle or jumping on the pile. It wasn't Mapu. Maybe he gets there a little bit quicker as he gets more experience, but not someone to play right now. Okay, let's go to the AFC North, folks, and let's go to your Cincinnati Bengals. Not a whole lot new to talk about there. Geno Stone, who left the last game injured, did end up playing 98% of the snaps this game. So whatever the injury wasn't a big deal. 5 tackles, 2 solo. Von Bell, who had been losing snaps to Jordan Battle, was losing a couple of series per game, actually. That kind of changed this week. Von Bell played 93% of the snaps. Jordan Battle only played 5%. But you may have noticed a long TD pass to Devontae Smith where Jordan Battle was the one that got burned. That could have been the reason why he was not rotating with Von Bell as the game went on. Moving to the Browns. They played a very nice 69 snaps on defense. Myles Garrett played 81% of the snaps, which is great considering all the injuries that he has been dealing with. That is the 4th game in a row, though, that he has had no sacks. Now, according to PFF, his pass rush grades and his pressures were fantastic this past week. So once again, shout out to PFF. But unfortunately, he didn't generate any sacks. Now, in fairness, it was Lamar Jackson. And so if he's starting to recover from those injuries and he's not chasing around Lamar Jackson, then maybe some of those pressures will translate to quarterback hits and quarterback sacks as we move forward. I'm still concerned about all these injuries that he had, folks. I've talked about in previous broadcasts or episodes, I should say, that I'm really worried about him for the rest of the year. In a redraft, I'm still thinking about trying to trade him. Maybe if he does pull off a sack this week, which is going to make it hard because you're going to like, oh, he's back. I don't want to trade him. But that's when you should absolutely trade him. Agbo Okoronkwo, another edge player, hurt his knee and also left the game early as an FYI, which could mean more snaps for both Garrett and Zadarius Smith as well. Although there's rumors of Zadarius Smith being on the trade block before the November 5th trade deadline. Is there anything else happening important on November 5th? I can't remember off the top of my head. Maybe some sort of elections or something along those lines. So anyway, interesting. The trade deadline will be interfering with our elections as well. Okay, back to linebackers. JOK sadly was carted off. The reports are he had movement in all extremities and that he's doing much better. Will he be able to play this week? Unknown at this point. Jordan Hicks missed last week. Mohamed Diabate, and I know I butchered that name, so apologies if his family is listening or any relatives in any way, shape, or form. But he was the one that played 87% of the snaps, and when Hicks was out previously, he played a lot of those snaps as well. It wasn't Devin Bush in the last game, it was Diabate and then Bush. So 2 data points with Diabate instead of Bush. Now, if Hicks plays and JOK is out, it's going to be really interesting. I would be willing to take the chance on playing Diabate, even if Hicks is there this past week, because Hicks has not been playing his typical 100% of the snaps. So I could see Diabate playing 80 to 90% of the snaps, doing similar like he did last week with the 9 tackles, 5 solo, the tackle for loss, pass defense. I could see him doing that. Can't see Devin Bush doing that, by the way, but I could see him doing that. So Diabate, I'm actually going to put in some bids on in my fab leagues for this coming week. At the safety position, Delpit's back from the concussion, played 100% of the snaps. Juan Thornhill, instead of playing 100% of the snaps, not that he's someone that we want to play because he plays a lot of deep safety and all, but he's been rotating still with Rodney McLeod, who plays 62% of the snaps to Thornhill 78%. Not touching either one, not putting either one in my lineups. Not only did the Browns play a very nice 69 snaps on defense, so did the Baltimore Ravens play a very nice 69 snaps on defense. On the defensive line, both Brent Urban and Michael Pierce both left the game fairly early. And so anyway, something to watch out. That could mean Madubuike ends up getting more snaps. Travis Jones gets more snaps. Roderick Washington gets more snaps. The reality, though, is Madubuike is the only one I want to put into my lineup in a defensive tackle required lineup. But maybe similar to the Deron Payne conversation earlier in the NFC East, maybe a good opportunity for him to generate more stats. At the safety position, we had a benching. Marcus Williams, who had been really struggling this year. And the Ravens, of course, have been picked apart. Their pass defense has been horrible this year, and Jameis Winston torched them. Great for the Browns, and there's all the great discussion about, boy, if Winston had been playing all year instead of Watson, that's all great. But the Ravens' pass defense has sucked all year, so be careful about going there too fast on the Cleveland Browns offense. Tangent. Back to the discussion of the defensive backs. Kyle Hamilton played 100% of the snaps. Eddie Jackson, the veteran, also played 100% of the snaps. He had 10 tackles, 6 solo, 1 pass defense. 67% of his snaps were deep, though. Okay, and remember they did play 69 snaps, and Jameis was chunking it around, which down the field, so created lots of opportunities. But if Marcus Williams is out, who's not known as more of a tackling machine, he was more of a deep ball defender, for lack of a better term. So Jackson is more known for his tackling capability as well. Jackson could be someone to pick up in a deeper league. Okay, but keep an eye on any news that, okay, they wanted to teach Marcus Williams a lesson and he may go back into the starting lineup. That's where you got to be careful. Don't overbid on Eddie Jackson. And by the way, not only did Marcus Williams get benched, when they needed a third safety, our Darius Washington went in. It wasn't Marcus Williams. Last thing, Trenton Simpson played 97% of the snaps, which was by far his highest of the year. He had been averaging between 60 and low 70s roughly percent snaps per game. So this was a shocker. And even though he played all those snaps and the Ravens were on the field for that long, he had 4 tackles, all of which were solo, and only 1 tackle for loss. That's not that much production for being on the field that long, folks. So, um, was that game plan specific that they were expecting against the Browns? Was it because of the concerns in the safety in the secondary for the Ravens? Because I didn't even mention the fact that their top two corners, Marlon Humphrey and Nate Wiggins, were both also out as well. Well, Brandon Stevens probably the second, Wiggins is third, but Stevens played. But that bunch of backup cornerbacks back there, is that why they decided to leave Simpson more in the field? Don't expect a repeat of that playing time if Humphrey and if Wiggins are back on the field for this coming week. Okay, moving to the Steelers in the Monday night game. TJ Watt and Alex Highsmith, close but not exact in the first half. In the second half, both of them 2 sacks apiece in the second half, just destroyed the tackles for the Giants, and that's probably what caused the Giants to lose and the Steelers to win, was the pressure from those folks and what they generate with those sacks. Patrick Queen, who I've actually called out several times on this show or episode, whatever you want to call it, in the past many weeks, he actually had one of his better games, and that's 8 tackles and 3 solo. That's not saying a whole lot, folks. Very disappointing productivity from Patrick Queen this year. Peyton Wilson back down to only 42% of the snaps. Elaine and Roberts down to 33% of the snaps. Neither one had many IDP stats, not even worth mentioning what they were. Very disappointing overall, particularly as much as the Giants were attempting to run the ball, particularly earlier in the game. So Roberts, I wanted to drop for a while. I'm still stashing Peyton Wilson, not necessarily dropping him, but kind of disappointing there. At the safety position, Deshaun Elliott only played 75% of the snaps, 7 tackles, 5 solo, 1 pass defense. But he was playing very well, but only 75% of the snaps. I didn't see anything on injuries, and I have to be honest, I didn't mention him. I didn't notice him being out of the games. I didn't hear any mention of him being injured and out of the game. So Terrell Edmonds, the former Steeler who they re-signed, played 25% in his absence. The other thing, back to the linebackers, DeMonte Casey ended up playing 26% of the snaps. And I haven't gone back, unfortunately, yet at this point in time because of the Monday night game to be able to look at some all-22 film and see if Casey ended up playing some of that linebacker position on obvious passing downs. And is that what happened to Wilson and or Roberts playing time? So something else to keep an eye on with the Steelers. Okay, we have now completed the AFC North. And let's move to the AFC South. And just want to get a couple of my notes here in place, folks. Thanks for your patience. And let's start with the Colts. EJ Speed returned from injury, and he was extremely productive with 10 tackles, 5 of which were solo, 1 tackle for loss, and a pass defense. Glad to see him back. Zaire Franklin also had 11 tackles and 7 solo. Anthony Richardson didn't exactly have a good game on offense for the Colts. What does that mean? Colts play more snaps on defense. Now, it was also announced on Tuesday that Joe Flacco is coming back, which will impact those stats for Speed and Franklin. I expect them to trickle down some from what we saw this past Sunday. Also at the linebacker position, Jalen Carley, who was a safety in college. They moved him to a linebacker. He had become their number 3 linebacker, was playing primarily in Speed's absence when Speed was out. Then Carley's got hurt. He was hurt so bad he got put on injured reserve. And as a result, Grant Stewart is now the number 3 linebacker. Grant Stewart played 41% of the snaps. And let's just say he only had 2 tackles. We'll just leave it at that. Segun Olubi is still sort of the backup to if Franklin's out. He got a few snaps, had a couple of tackles as well, one of which was, I believe, also on special teams. So unless Franklin or Speed are out, Stewart and Olubi have Zippo value. Glad to see DeVaris Buckner back at defensive tackle, folks, with 3 tackles, 2 solo. He got a sack, 2 quarterback hits, tackle for loss, and he played 61% of the snaps in his first game back, which is fantastic. Puts him back in the number 1 defensive tackle conversation. A top 12 is what I'm going to say number 1, and probably within that a top 3 or top 4. So if someone dropped Buckner, go get him and be aggressive on your bidding in your redraft leagues. Deo Odeyingbo, you can count on him for 4 games every year where he's going to do really well. The question is which 4, because it's not even consistent with teams that you would expect to giving up a lot of points to defensive ends or edges. He seems to do well on some of those and not on others. It's just so unpredictable and so frustrating and so much of a risk of a goose egg. So, like the player, don't like the inconsistency from an IDP perspective. So he had 4 tackles, 3 solo, a sack, 3 quarterback hits. So if you want to play him every week, and then when he has those 4 great games, fantastic. But otherwise, that's too frustrating for me. Latu and Pay, very disappointing in the IDP stats perspective this week. Let's go to the Jaguars. Foye Aluakhan returned from IR. Fantastic. We were worried about would this rotation thing happen. Yes, it did, but at least he played 91% of the snaps and not in the low 80s as he did previously prior to the injury. Ventrell Miller played 59%. Devin Lloyd only played 56%. Chad Muma, odd man out. They were rotating 4 previously. Now they're down to 3. You can't see that, so let's try that again on the video. 4 and 3. Now you could actually see all the fingers. Anyway, so it looks like for the most part, Aluakhan may sit out a series, and then he'll play most of the majority of the snaps besides that, and a little bit more of a Miller-Lloyd rotation. And when they have 3 linebackers, it'll be those 2 that are playing this number 2, number 3 linebacker, and then a rotation as well when they're down to 2 linebackers. When you look at the stats, Aluakhan came back with 9 tackles for, which was solo, and a tackle for loss, which is fantastic in his first game back. Miller, 7 tackles, 5 of which were solo and a tackle for loss. Devin Lloyd, only 3 tackles, 2 solo, and 1 tackle for loss. Devin Lloyd is the one by far that took the biggest hit on this. Very leery about playing him and or Miller in my lineup this coming week. But if I had to pick between the 2, it's Miller over Lloyd right now. Interesting. Wouldn't have bet that earlier this year. The Texans start with linebackers. Aziz Al-Shaair and Henry Toto. And I don't know if that's his name, but I love saying it that way. So that's the way we're going to roll with it. So Al-Shaair and Toto both out this week once again. So Neville Hewitt played 100% of the snaps in the middle, only had 6 tackles, 4 solo, 1 pass defense. Okay. Remember, the Colts offense wasn't on the field very much, though. So just remember that. So don't hold that against the Texans linebackers. Devin White, Jake Hansen had an even 50-50% split of the snap count. White had 3 tackles, 2 which were solo. Of course, the former Buck linebacker, former All-Pro, who the Eagles signed and then released. Now the Texans have picked him up. That was White. Jake Hansen played 50% of the snaps. He lucked into a sack where the quarterback was scrambling. He tackled him right at the line of scrimmage, basically, and so he got credit for a sack. Neither one of those guys are worth playing. Toto is definitely supposed to be back this coming week. I expect it to be Toto and Hewitt that are playing, with Hewitt still wearing the green dot is my expectation, and Toto in his normal alignment. But Toto playing probably close to 90% of the snaps. So that's my prediction for the week going forward. I'm not rushing out to pick out Devin White, and don't like that Jake Hansen snap. Don't let that, I should say, to be more clear, don't let that Hansen snap fool you when you're looking at the points from last week and force you or have you decide to put in a claim on it. Don't do it. Don't do it. Don't do it. Don't do it. Did I say don't do it? Jimmy Ward is out again this week, folks, or was out this week again, I should say. Eric Murray played 100% of the snaps. Considering how few snaps the Texans played, 7 tackles, 5 solo, 3 pass defense for Eric Murray is pretty darn good. He's just a guy, folks. There's a reason he has been a number 3 safety on most of the teams he's been a part of in his career. He is a veteran. He can pick up defense, etc. But don't go chasing it, folks. Will Henderson and Daniil Hunter, wow, those guys are turning up. Hunter is finally turning it on after a slow start. He had 2 sacks again this week, along with 3 quarterback hits. Will Anderson had another sack, but 7 tackles, 5 of which were solo. Incredible performance by Will Anderson and Daniil Hunter both. On the Titans side of things, they gave up, okay, think about this, folks. They gave up 52 points in total on 48 defensive snaps. Now, granted, some of the scoring was on special teams. Think about that. For every defensive snap they played, they gave up a point. That's just absurd. The Lions, what it was, they only had to go 4 drives, had 25 yards less to go to score, and they scored rather quickly on those. Jared Goff threw for 85 yards and they put up 52 points. I mean, just absolutely absurd. Okay, I digress. But anyway, even with that, first, let's start with Kenneth Murray. One unassisted tackle. What the freak? And he played 100% of those snaps. That's just embarrassing, folks. And he caused me to lose a game in the King Classic, which I lost by .08. So I'm like, dude, breathe on somebody, do something. One unassisted tackle. Okay, so right now, if that's how he's going to play, and is it because the Titans, they traded Hopkins as an example, they traded away Jones for Baker, and then they didn't even play Baker this week. He had to come up to speed, but yet Jones goes and plays 100% in Seattle. Oh, that Titans thing is a mess, folks. Jack Gibbons played 100% of the snaps. To his credit, he had 8 tackles, 4 solo. Where were you, Kenneth Murray? Now, he sucked with the Chargers. A lot of people knew that, from a performance perspective. He had some, IDP stats, for lack of a better term. Titans probably overpaid him. They're probably going to regret that. I wouldn't be surprised to see them take a cap hit on him at the end of the year. If he has a decent week coming up, folks, try and trade Kenneth Murray. That is my advice to you. Already mentioned the fact that Jerome Baker was inactive. And as a side note, Cedric Gray, the 4th-round draft pick, who last week I talked about the fact they had activated him to begin practicing from IR, but hadn't activated him yet. They finally did on Monday of this week. So this could be interesting. Does Murray get benched? Does Gibbons not play? Does this become Baker and Gray, let the rookie play, since they're already out of the playoff chase and they're starting to get rid of veterans to get draft picks for the future? Cedric Gray, go get him and stash him for your deep rosters. He could be someone very, very interesting, folks. Keep an eye on this. Okay, keep an eye on it. All right, with that, let's move to our last division, the AFC West, the Denver Broncos. Broncos only played 61% of snaps on defense. PJ Locke was inactive due to injury. Devin Key played in his place, 5 tackles, 2 solo. Fairly consistent with what Locke had been doing, quite frankly. Locke late last year was blitzing a lot, coming off the edge a lot. They're not using him nearly that much this year. They haven't had to because of the way the pass rush is happening from the Benitos of the world, and the Coopers of the world, and the Zach Allens of the world. So they haven't had to bring in these safeties to do it. So it's been hurting Locke. Did the same thing for Key. Brandon Jones led the team with 12 tackles, 7 of which were solo. Very productive on 61 snaps. Now, at the linebacker position, Cody Barton played 100% of the snaps. He's not like an all-pro type of player. He's solid player. Great results for 61 snaps. Justin Sternard, once again, there's a little bit of a platoon going this week with him and Quan Alexander. Sternard played 61% of the snaps. Alexander played 21% of the snaps. Now, it was a little bit of a blowout for the second game in a row. So, there was against the Panthers, and you probably heard all the noise about Panthers complaining about Sean Payton. It's like, well, guys play 60 minutes, okay? But anyway, don't rely on Sternard. Can't do it. Several weeks ago when Quan Alexander was signed to the practice squad along with Zach Cunningham, I was worried about one of those two becoming the number 2 linebacker. Still, think there's a chance of that. So not only am I not playing Sternard, I'm kind of keeping an eye to potentially pick up Alexander as well. Nick Bonito, 6 freaking games in a row. That gentleman has come up with a sack. 6 in a row. That is pretty damn impressive. Can he make it a lucky 7 in a row? The odds are certainly against it, but I'm not betting against it. So for those of you that have Nick Bonito, congratulations, and keep on rolling him out there. On the Chargers side of things, the 3-headed monster at linebacker wasn't such of a 3-headed monster. The great news for Deion Henley is he played 100% of the snaps, which was phenomenal. I think that's the first time this year, if I recall correctly. 11 tackles, 6 solo, 1 pass defense. Awesome. On the other hand, Denzel Perriman only played 34% of the snaps. Junior Colson only played 14% of the snaps. Okay, and both of them limited productivity, with Perriman 3 tackles, 2 solo. Colts and 2 tackles, one of which was solo. Not very productive in those limited snaps. What does that say for now? You can only trust Henley in your lineup, and with 100% of the snaps played, roll him out there. I would assume that will continue. That would be my prediction right now. So keep on rolling Henley out there. Joey Bosa comes back from injury, plays about 25% of the snaps, and what happens? He gets hurt a freaking again. This time it's rumored to be a hamstring, and he missed all the rest of the game. So as good and talented as he is, thank God a long time ago in my favorite dynasty league, I picked Nick Bosa over Joey Bosa. Hallelujah for that one. I'm just giving up on Bosa, folks. If I owned him, I'm trying to dump him for a box of chocolates, a low round draft pick. No, I wouldn't do a low round draft pick necessarily, but boy, any productive game he has, if it's before your trade deadline, try and sell him. Try and get some sort of draft pick for him for the future. Okay, moving to the Chiefs. They only played 52 snaps on defense against the Raiders. Keep that in mind. Mike Dana was ruled out yet again. We talked about Josh Uche earlier. Go to the Patriots part in the AFC East to hear more about that if you've been skipping around. The Chiefs safeties, very interesting. Justin Reed was the only one that played 100%. Brian Cook, 84%. Shamari Connor all the way down to 47%. Jaden Hicks down at 16%, which is what he's been playing the last 2 or 3 weeks, like they're trying to ease him in. Someone, once again, from a safety perspective, like the way he played in college, like the way he tackles, someone to stash. But with all the cornerback injuries they've been having, I was surprised they didn't put Connor more into the slot and that he would have a higher percentage of snaps. So there's a lot of no names at the other cornerback position across from Trent McDuffie or in the slot. I'm being very careful with this Chiefs defense. The only safety I'm playing is Reed, and the only cornerback I'm playing, the cornerback required leads, is Trent McDuffie. Wrapping up with the Raiders finally, bringing all 32 teams to a close. Robert Spillane, boy, I saw him get hurt, and at first it looked like a knee, and I was panicked. But he ended up only missing 1 snap, thankfully, and he had 12 tackles and 6 solo. Max Crosby, for the second week in a row, played 100% of the snaps, his usual 100%. Remember, the 2 weeks before that, he was battling that high ankle injury, and so he didn't play 100% of the snaps. Very unusual for him. And 100% of the snaps is just crazy for an edge person, and though as hard as he plays. I digress. But anyway, he should continue to be recovering from that high ankle sprain and expect more and more productivity as the year progresses. Lastly, at linebacker also, Devon Diablo, who had been playing a little bit over 90% of the snaps the first couple of weeks that he returned from injury. This past week, slightly down at 85%, 7 tackles, 4 solo. So is he returning back to that, low 80s kind of role that he's played in the past? I bet probably so, folks. So that extra oomph that we're hoping to get from Diablo from playing more snaps, don't count on it anymore. And there you have it, folks. 1 hour and 8 minutes and change of a run through of every division of snaps, playing time, alignments, injuries, waivers, stashes, you name it. I hope you heard it here. You can jump around, as I talked about, to go division by division to pick up on certain teams. But all of this stuff, all our great tools at IDP Plus, you can get so much of this information as well. Our rankings, our snap counts, our how teams do in terms of giving up points to positions on both defense and offense. Really a spectacular tool. Our articles, our rankings, so much great stuff at IDP Plus. So hope you'll join us there. Also, our IDP Bets channel is winning a lot of people a lot of money. We also have those articles on our website as well. The books, the DraftKings, the FanDuels are not doing so well in setting the prop bets, and we are helping on the IDP side of things. We're helping people win a lot of freaking money, folks. So check out IDP Bets channel, okay, as well as IDP Bets articles on the website. So with that, I bid you adieu. The IDP Plus Advice Show. I hope you liked it. If you did, give me a thumbs up. Give me your comments. I'll be checking periodically for questions as well. So if you have some questions, go ahead and put them in here. But really, come to our Start Sit show on this same YouTube channel on Sunday mornings, 11 Eastern. Get your questions in early because we'll start cutting them off at an hour because we had almost 2 hours worth of questions. So get in early this week, folks. With that, take care, be good to one another, and thank you for joining me. Have a good one, folks.
Thank you for watching the IDP Plus YouTube network. If you enjoyed this video, give it a thumbs up and don't forget to subscribe to our channel. Be sure to tap the bell icon to get notified whenever we upload new content.